Starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Rochelle Wilder, and I'm the Specialty Practice Sections Associate at the National Association of Social Workers and your moderator for today. NASW is pleased to welcome you to our webinar, Physiological Therapy for Public Speaking Anxiety and Fear Being Noticeably Nervous, as I am right now. To enhance your learning experience, we encourage our live audience to engage in the question and answer session through the text chats feature. We will have a Q&A session at the end. We will make every effort to answer as many questions as time allows. Please note that this event will be recorded. By participating in the Q&A portion, you consent to having your questions and comments recorded and to NASW making the recording available on its website and through other media, and you waive any rights you may have related to the recording. Today's presentation is about to begin. The session will last approximately 90 minutes. If you need assistance viewing the slides, downloading materials, or you are experiencing any other technical problems, please call 1-877-880-1335, and I'll put that in the chat box, and a representative from the Social Work Online CE Institute will assist you. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Jonathan Berent. He's the author of Work Makes Me Nervous, Overcome Anxiety and Build the Confidence to Succeed, and Beyond Shyness, How to Conquer Social Anxieties. Since 1978, he has pioneered treatment for social anxiety, having worked with thousands of individuals of all ages and functioning levels in individual, group, and family therapy. Jonathan has been featured extensively in the media, including Oprah, CNN, CBS, ABC, Fox, CNBC, The New York Times, The Daily News, and Newsday. As a stress management consultant, his clients have included NBC, Bankers Trust, and Bloomingdale's. His website is socialanxiety.com, and I would highly recommend everyone going to his website. He has wonderful resources on there. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jonathan.
I'm honored to be here, and I am a bit energized. As a matter of fact, I want to show you something before I turn my screen off. Okay, so this is a biofeedback card called a BioCard. I'm putting my thumb on it in real time here, so we can measure what's going on. And I take it off, and it measures black, which is the equivalent of stress. Now, when I started my career in 1978, it was biofeedback based. This was one machine that we used. This measures peripheral blood flow, skin temperature, vasodilation, vasoconstriction. Okay, when we talk about energy, it's all about electricity. There was a galvanic skin response, electroencephalograph, electromyograph for muscle tension. But right now, I'm measuring skin temperature, and it's exactly at this moment the energy that many of my patients dread when they begin a presentation. They fear, are they going to be in control of their adrenaline, or are they going to have a panic attack? Now, just going back to this biofeedback card, one woman asked once, does this really work? Now, I'm not sure what she was expecting. Yes, this really does work as a tool to measure physiology. The key word, which we're going to get to in a minute, is interoception, which is awareness of internal physiology. So again, this is measuring vasoconstriction, vasodilation. When a person can increase their skin temperature 3 degrees, that's enough to abort a panic attack or a migraine. But obviously, That takes a lot more training than basic awareness. Okay, now, when this energy is not controlled, there are various symptoms that can come about. For example, a panic attack, fear of losing control, difficulty breathing, increased heartbeat. And then once this happens, once a person has their first panic attack, what's very common is that there's going to be obsessive hypervigilance after that happens, waiting for the next one. This can be very disarming. Blushing, erythrophobia. People can see, as people are afraid, people can see who I really am. They can see the fraud. This is what people are projecting. As one of my patients said, who was an ovarian cancer survivor, she almost died. She said, Jonathan, I'd rather be back in chemotherapy than speak in front of a group. Sweating, hyperhidrosis, voice freeze, selective mutism. This is a very insidious problem that basically has brought the mental health profession to its knees. Think of it as a phobia of speaking. Very specifically, it's a complex example of obsessive compulsive disorder. Mind freeze, quivering voice, trembling, difficulty swallowing. And by the way, I want to turn my video off so people can't see me being nervous. Okay, so think of this seminar as your map for healing. And basically, what I'm doing here is giving a marathon's worth of content in basically what is a sprint. Now, the word evidence-based is very common in mental health circles, and it can be very misused. Anything can be evidence. I want you to know who you're getting your information from, so I humbly submit as evidence the content at socialanxiety.com. There's a wealth of information there, and most importantly, there is an extensive clinical library of people who have experienced various aspects of social phobia, performance anxiety, and they talk about how they got well. If you listen carefully, you'll go beyond the testimonials and you'll get insight into the treatment process. Okay, now when it comes to diagnostics, there are a few that can be used for public speaking. We start with social phobia, an anxiety disorder characterized by an intense irrational fear in one or more social situations in which the individual fears he or she will be scrutinized by others. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is characterized by a preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and control. And many of the patients that I work with performance anxiety and public speaking anxiety are perfectionists and have obsessive compulsive personality. Selective mutism, again, a very insidious, complex problem, an anxiety disorder in which a person who is normally capable of speech does not speak in certain situations or to specific people. Now, when one does a search on the internet, most of the information regarding selective mutism that comes up is about children. But I can assure you these children turn into teenagers and adults, and many have been in my practice. As a matter of fact, one of the most common things that I have heard in my clinical practice is I don't know what to say or I have nothing to say. Now, note this quote on the bottom. I find this absolutely mind-blowing. Texting has replaced talking as the most common form of communication. Now, to me, this is mind-blowing, being 72 years of age. The reality is that on a societal basis, the neural pathways required for verbal communication have been severely impacted. Moving on with diagnostics. The terms panic, obsessive worry, hypervigilance, that's the ongoing energy of looking for a perceived threat. Detachment, which is a defense mechanism people learn over time to disconnect from feelings and thoughts. and what's going on in the body. Avoidance, when anxiety turns into avoidance, it's a phobia. And challenge self-esteem, these are all interchangeable with the concept of pain. Now, focusing on obsessive worry for a moment, because that's what brings most of my patients down. There are two types of worry. There's worry that people learn to believe that when they worry, they are in control. And there is worry, which is energy, which is channeled into problem solving. So, welcome to CrossFit. When I do a session with patients, I often start with welcome to your CrossFit session, because paradoxical intention, that means the opposite, is so important when it comes to healing anxiety. Interoception is the perception of sensations from inside the body. And it includes the perceptions of physical sensations related to internal organ functions such as heartbeat, respiration, satiety, as well as the autonomic nervous system and related to emotions. When I started this seminar a few minutes ago, not only were my hands cold and I could actually feel the vasoconstriction as it was taking place, but I was also aware of my heart beating a little faster. And these are all energy. This is all energy that when one has the intention to breathe and focus, it can be controlled. So from the point that I started integrating social anxiety into my practice in around 1978, it became clear to me that I had to adapt a clinical protocol specifically to the needs of social anxiety sufferers, rather than try to fit the problem into one already existing clinical protocol. So therefore, we have the following architecture. Think of FATE as an acronym. F stands for function, physiology. A, action, behavior. It speaks for itself. T, thinking, cognition. And last but not least, E equals emotere, energy in motion. Now, I think this is really profound. The Latin word for emotion, E-M-O-T-E-R-E, literally means energy in motion. This brings us to a point that is very important, at the risk of being a little controversial. At my website, socialanxiety.com, January 31st, 2020, the tip of the month, researching the research on cognitive behavioral therapy and social anxiety. The bottom line with this research, which is very scholarly, by the way, and it took a long time to do, is that it shows many flaws in CBT's research. They refer to themselves as the gold standard for treatment with social anxiety. I have no doubt that CBT is really good in treating other conditions. That said, there are many flaws to their research, and what it does is it sets the potential consumer up for unrealistic expectations as it applies to treatment. One of the most important things that I can teach today is emotional agility. So in the Harvard Business Review, November 2013, an article by Susan David and Christina Congleton, and I'm quoting, "Effective leaders don't buy into or try to suppress their inner experiences. They approach them in a mindful way, labeling thoughts and emotions, values, and developing what we call emotional agility." Okay, so we take that a step further with emotere, identifying the specific emotion and then being able to label it to what degree. One of my patients was a scientist, and when she did her journaling and she would build her emotions into it, happy, sad, angry, glad, she would always put a number to designate the intensity of the energies. Because remember, when we're talking about public speaking anxiety, we're talking about unresolved emotional energy, which is driving the problem. Now, the following quote was from a patient who is a world-renowned hematology expert. She has saved many lives. She's an MD. And this is what she said midway through her treatment. I didn't realize my conscious thoughts drive emotions and actions rather than allowing them to flow as if directed by something external. I mean, think of that. Here is this doctor, this MD, who at age 46 is basically discovering the mind-body connection. Remember, fate, physiology, behavior, thinking, and emotion. When one glues fate together, it can be profoundly empowering. So, starting with our treatment protocol, it is very important that a person develop their hierarchy of anxiety. Now, what I'm talking about right now is quite complex, and 9 out of 10 very smart people find this quite confusing. But this is from a financial analyst, age 32. This person actually resolved his public speaking anxiety problem in around 20 sessions without medicine, which was quite an accomplishment. Look at the specificity that he created on his hierarchy. Number one, being with many friends in large group, talking to clients who don't have an investing experience. Number two, speaking with certain members of wife's family, speaking in front of a large group of my wife's family, and so forth. The specificity with which this person operated was very much related to his success. Now, the purpose, and this, I'm giving you a head start because this question is on your post-test. So write it down. The purpose of creating a hierarchy is to organize interoceptive awareness and skills acquisition. When one creates a hierarchy, it's important to think expansively. One of my patients had a number 2 position in a Fortune 500 company. Number 6 on his 1 to 10 hierarchy was speaking to his wife about an issue where there was potential conflict. Now, the purpose, when one advances with understanding with the hierarchy, there are a couple of purposes. Okay, so we want to organize our skill set. And this is what becomes especially confusing, which we'll get to in a second, is the technique of surfing, which is the primary technique for adrenaline control. But let's just say, for the sake of relativity, that on this behavioral hierarchy, this person had waves that started at a level 4 or 5. Okay, so it's one thing to be able to start surfing, which I'll get to in a second, at a 4 or 5, but here's what's really complex. What happens when you're at a level 2, 3, 4? There's an awakening of energy, an awakening of physiology. For example, in my family on Thanksgiving, 20 people sitting around at a table, what do you give thanks for? I do not have anxiety, but on a scale of 1 to 10, 0.25, I'm feeling this electricity, this awakening. And it's important to be able to tune into the awakening because you have to make friends with the energy that eventually, as a longer term goal, you're going to control. So using the hierarchy to develop awareness of awakening in addition to developing accountability with implementation of surfing skills. Okay, now if I have the bio card on now, if I put my thumb on it, it's still black, but it's beginning to turn a little bit into green. Vasodilation, absolutely happening in real time. Now, building on the concept of the hierarchy, many of my clients I recommend go to Toastmasters. Toastmasters is an international support group for public speaking. There are countless people who attend who obviously have significant issues with public speaking, and other people go to compete in public speaking competition. There are two components of Toastmasters. One is the topic of the day, which gives an opportunity for improv. And then there are the formal speeches. And what I've seen over time is that Toastmasters can be thought of as a form of group therapy, because for the typical patient, it's going to be a good 5 or 6 on their hierarchy. One person goes to Toastmasters and says, listen, I'm having a hard time. I'm going to take a beta blocker. And my response to that, we'll talk about medicine down the road here, but my response to that is Toastmasters is not a place for beta blockers. Toastmasters is a place to experiment with learning how to take control of the energy of adrenaline. Again, the paradox of attachment. This is cross-training. You need to feel that which you are going to control. To make friends with adrenaline, you first have to make its acquaintance. So here we go back to this 32-year-old who resolved his problem. And this is an example of interoceptive awareness and the awakening. This is what's hard for most people, but listen carefully as he really gets into detail. Waves usually start around a 3. At this level, I start to feel some tightness in my body. I often find it slightly harder to breathe, and I become more conscious of that. More intense waves start to happen at 6 and 7. At this level, I am speaking with several members of my team or to a large group of clients who are experienced investors. This is around where I feel the drop in hand temperature. By the way, check your hand temperature now. Is it dry? Is it warm? What are you thinking? What are you feeling as you tune into your skin temperature? If I feel like the first couple of minutes my presentation or discussion went well, I'm able to feel my heart rate slow down and body loosen up. If dry mouth appears, though it isn't always easy for me to overcome when I feel the first couple of minutes have gone well. This is one of the symptoms I fear the most, because there have been times where my mouth completely dried out. I usually have to pause. Again, this is a good example of going inside. So here we come to the technique for adrenaline control, the primary technique. So there are 4 steps. Number 1 is realistic expectations. Do not waste any time hoping your adrenaline will not be there. It's going to be there. Expect it. Number 2, which is the hardest, is to accept the wave with the interpretation that it's power and your friend. Now, when you start this, it's not going to be your friend, but this is what you have to build on. 1 or 2 diaphragmatic breaths. And then the image of the surfing cat. This is my cat who's in kitty heaven. Look at it carefully. Look at the colors. Surfing the wave in shark-infested waters. Going with the energy. The wave is the adrenaline. You go with it, you're in control. You don't go with it, it smashes you around, and that's panic. And as what the shark represents, I try to teach my patients, especially those who are entrepreneurs and in business, there's no such thing as an ambush. Be ready for the sharks. So what actually happens? What actually happens when one is experiencing anxiety response while public speaking? Okay, this is where we have to break things into section A and B. Okay, section A is on the, and again, this is going to be another, I'm giving you guys a head start. This is going to be another question on your test. A is on the front line with adrenaline. A person goes into a presentation scenario, there is a perceived threat. What is the perceived threat? Fear of judgment. This activates adrenaline. Upon the first sensation of adrenaline, the person's internal critical script, which is a mind state, which we're going to get to soon, goes something like, this is bad, not good, got to get out of here. This exacerbates the adrenaline. It makes it worse. This is what turns into the noticeably nervous symptoms and potential panic. But that's not the end of the story, which brings us to part B. What has been triggered is unresolved emotional content in one's reservoir. The reservoir is your conscious and not conscious past and present. And this is where the hard work in treatment is. Most people who come to therapy for public speaking say, I want technique, technique, technique. Okay, and when it comes time for the deeper work, that's the most important, and that is the toughest. Moving forward. Okay, so we need tools in treatment. And one tool that I have found to be immensely helpful is the concept of mind states, which comes from the psychology of transactional analysis. Now, the creator of transactional analysis was Eric Berent, a psychiatrist who was largely influenced by Freud, though by the time of his death in 1970, in some ways he became a critic of Freud. Transactional analysis does have its roots in psychodynamic therapy. So one of the things that's missing in treatment all too often is concrete objectives. What I'm going to show you now in this before and after ego-graph are the objectives of treatment. And by the way, this egogram concept was developed by John Doucet, MD. So here's a map of one's personality who has performance anxiety. So we know where the brain is. The brain is in the head, up on the top. And these 5 states make up one's personality. There's no such thing as a bad mind state. The issue is balance or synergy. What I want to do right now is to just define these states. Being able to talk in mind state terminology can be very, very empowering. Okay, so let's start with the one in the middle. This is your adult. This is your internal computer. Logic and objectivity not contaminated by emotion. It's your scientific self. It's evidence. Ask yourself a question. If you suffer from performance anxiety, where do you need more logic versus emotion? One patient who was president of the PTA was speaking in front of the group. A person at the back of the room said, I can't hear you. At that point, she had a panic attack. I get her in my office and I say, go back to that situation, put yourself in your adult mind state. What did he mean when he said he couldn't hear you? Oh, he couldn't hear me. That's it. But what happened was it triggered unresolved content from her reservoir. The adult is not intelligence. If you're listening to this seminar and you have interest in this subject, I already know you're intelligent. This is specifically logic and objectivity. Now, look at the left-hand tower. Critical parent mind state. If your parents taught you don't play in traffic, that's good criticism. I have literally recorded myself in presentations hundreds of times for the purpose of improving my performance. That is good criticism. Many of my patients' critical script early in their life developed to say, you need to be successful. You're going to be successful. That's excellent. And many of them turned out to be successful. The problem is They haven't been able to turn off the intensity of the critical script. The excessive energy in the critical script is what drives and causes the problem of performance anxiety. I mean, these are huge concepts. Okay, so now look at the right-hand tower. Adapted child, learned emotion and behavior, energy that is conforming, compromising, and manipulating. Obviously, this makes the world go round. Any new skill is going to be located in the adapted child. Okay, but ask yourself this question. What would you do? What would you do with a little child who's very close to you, who's having a temper tantrum? He's upset or she's upset. One of the answers that I get is I would ignore the child. Oh, okay, so 5 hours, 5 days later, you would ignore the child? I would try to find out what's happening. The child is too upset to tell you what's happening. Oh, I would comfort the child. This is nurturing. That's an example of nurturing. Your anxiety or your client's anxiety problem is located in the adapted child mind state. The critical script drives it. It's located in the adapted child. The two together can be considered a mind tic, not a neurological tic, but a very deeply ingrained psycho-physiological reflex. Okay, let's look at the other states for a minute. The nurturing parent, this is the critical state that needs to be increased, energy that promotes growth, teaches, acknowledges, and provides some more support. All too often, this is non-existent as compared to one's critical script. The natural child, genuine emotion, the truth of desire, the energy of exploration, discovery, spontaneity, and creativity, pleasure, fun, sexuality. It's your primitive self. Now, as people go through the treatment process, they have to learn how to engage the negative critical script. This is where the pathology is. So I have given a personality and a name to the excessive critical script, and this comes from a book I gave my granddaughter when she was 5 years old, and the name of the book, a little sense of humor here, natural child, is Runaway Booger. So going forward, you know that the pathology can be called booger, and it's going to be important to engage this entity. Now, talking about the adapted child, again, learned emotion and behavior, that is where the anxiety itself is located. Do you know, can you define in one sentence scientific definition of stress? It's not something up in the sky, it's something inside of us all. I referenced one patient who is a doctor. I have another one who I'm presently working with who's an orthopedic surgeon. I asked both of these physicians, can you give me a scientific definition of stress? And they could not. But here it is. The non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. In other words, physiological adaptation to change. This is what anxiety is all about. Many of my patients, well, first of all, when I began this seminar and I said, I'm energized and I'm electric, it's true. And I showed you my skin temperature, but I can assure you, I'm a lot less electric than if I was doing this in person. And many of my patients are currently in the situation where they're readapting to getting away from the Zoom and the computer screens to being able to deliver their messages in person, and it can be quite daunting. Okay, now this is what success looks like. This is where you want to end up if you have performance anxiety, or where you would like to take your patients. So let's take a look at the changes that have occurred. The Twin Towers has come down. We do not want them to go away. We just want them to be decreased. Okay, and primarily this is accomplished by growing the other states. And one has to be aware here of what are strategies that people use all too often to make those Twin Towers go down. Alcohol is the drug of choice for social anxiety. Why? Because it lowers the Twin Towers. The problem is it depresses the energy across the board in all of the mind states. So what we do is we think of increasing the others. Okay, so we start with the nurturing self, the nurturing parent. How do we do this? Here are the basic bullet points. One needs proactive intention to go inside, interoception and introspection. One of my patients who was an ACC quarterback, he actually threw for 2 touchdowns on TV against Notre Dame. He said, "This is really hard. You have to seek it out." Absolutely, you do. Healing is a process. It can't happen all at once. And people who have OCPD, which is perfectionism, can be very rigid thinkers. Many of them are very successful, and they're bringing into treatment with them the attitude of just tell me what to do, I want to fix it. And this is against the concept of a process. One needs to create surfing opportunities. This becomes a major investment in self-regulation skills. So in other words, if one knows that their waves start at a 4, the development of the nurturing mind state is to seek out opportunities rather than waiting passively for these challenges to come to you. You want to get as many reps as is possible. Self-acknowledgement. This is being able to say, good going. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of myself. All too often, the booger-driven, pathological, critical script so dominates that the nurturing self is non-existent. One way to think of this is that most of the clients who come into my practice for performance anxiety have a nurturing deficit. That's the trauma. Reservoir work. Remember section A, section B. Section A on the front line, section B is going deeper. So we go vertical. Vertical is bringing relevant content to a conscious level. Horizontal is being able to connect. It's crossing the bridge from the intellectual or the conceptual self to the emotional. It's one thing to identify, it's another thing to feel, which then brings us back to emotere. It's all about awareness of emotional energy. I have 2 types of patients, those who journal and those who do not. And when I teach a person to journal, it's organized into A, the front line, B, reservoir work. For example, with section A, I was in a level 3, a level 6, a level 7 this week. What was the internal energy like? Describe it. This is what I tried to do. This worked, this didn't work, etc. Reservoir work is deeper insight, being able to piece things together. You were not born with the problem. You may have been born with a predisposition to OCD or OCPD, whatever, but one learns performance anxiety. Moving on. Common sense things, sleep, nutrition, exercise. Each one of these subjects could be a book unto itself. Very briefly with nutrition, if one is giving a presentation, you want to stay away from things that will exacerbate adrenaline, caffeine, etc. Be wary of sugar. Sugar is love. Sugar is in everything. It's not good for the autonomic nervous system. exercise. Long-term research has demonstrated that quality aerobic exercise is more productive for the treatment of depression than antidepressants. Okay, now going back to the high performance mind for a second. This is the algorithm. The algorithm is nurturing your natural child with a good dose of adult. So the following story is something that I really enjoy telling. You know, in therapy, everything is confidential, but certain people have given me permission to use their names. One such person's name is Kirk Reeder. He used to pitch for the San Francisco Giants. As a matter of fact, he has won the most games as a left-hander. I believe that's still intact. And this was a good 15 years ago. Time is flying. We were working with his daughter who had selective mutism, who got better via treatment over the telephone. Anyway, I'm joking around with Kurt one day, and I say, "You ever have a bad game?" And he says, "I'm pitching against the Rockies. I'm losing 6-0 in the first inning. How do you deal with it?" "Well, I have to pitch every 5th day. So what I think about is, what do I have to do to be better the next time out?" Okay, isn't that the perfect winning psychology? So you have to ask, what gets in the way of thinking like that? The answer, too excessive and internal critical script, which we now know as booger, and unresolved self-esteem. But take a look at this again. This is what neuroplasticity looks like. This is what channeling the energy of emotion, emotere, looks like. Okay, now, with the adult mind state, developing the adult, a couple of key things. You got to start out with objective diagnostics. The world is graded 1 to 10. Okay, so 10 is the highest. It's very important to have integrity about identifying the degree of the problem. Nobody calls me without a significant problem. And quite frankly, the average age of people who call me for public speaking anxiety is in the late 40s and 50s. So when I get a call from somebody who's in the 20s, that's a really good head start. And the key for everything with treatment for performance anxiety requires accessing one's adult mind state to differentiate, separating performance from person. Okay, natural child. Okay, the natural child mind state, last but not least, exploration, discovery, the truth of desire, clarifying your true desire, risk-taking, experimenting, being proactive versus defense. Identify something now. Identify a natural child desire. Do this for yourselves or help your clients do this. Identify a natural child desire that has been blocked because of anxiety. Ask yourself, what happens when the natural child is suffocated? Here's the answer. And by the way, this is the core of everything. Tension myositis syndrome. Dr. Johnny Sarno, MD, died a few years ago. He worked at NYU. He developed the concept of tension myositis syndrome. And basically it goes like this. The mind creates the pain symptoms to aid in the repression of subconscious thoughts and feelings via mild oxygen deprivation. So, in other words, here, I am positioning, what Sarno is teaching is that any physical symptom that does not have an organic biological etiology to it is a manifestation or a symptom of TMS. So I am positioning public speaking, performance anxiety as a symptom of tension myositis syndrome. Now, the brilliance the brilliance of Sarno's work is in how he organizes the content in one's reservoir. So he breaks it down into the following categories. Let's start with childhood. I'm going to take a glass of water for a second. Okay, he breaks it into the following: physical, sexual, emotional abuse, the loss of a parent through death or divorce. This is the largest category, which he refers to as subtle emotional abuse. This happens when a parent is there physically but not emotionally for the child. Culturally, men have never known that their emotional closeness to the growing child, especially boys, is crucial if the child is to grow up strong and confident. The mother may have been cold or aloof or too occupied with their own emotional needs, which turns into parentifying the child. Parents who abuse drugs and alcohol cannot be there for the growing child. If they argue or fight a lot, the child will suffer emotional neglect. I've seen in my practice that parenting by alcoholic parents is the perfect cookbook for performance anxiety training. All of these contribute to feelings of unworthiness as we enter adult life. And very importantly, in the reservoir, was emotional expression encouraged or repressed? Most of this problem is based on repressed emotional energy. The emotere, the energy of emotere, is cycling right beneath the surface. So we go to the last question here. Patients ask, what does the past have to do with my public speaking anxiety? This energy is right beneath the surface, ready to be triggered. Here's an example. Here's an obvious example of childhood. Okay, patient X, age 32, came to the US from Ukraine 6 years ago. She works in commercial shipping administration. Both parents were alcoholics who she had to put in rehab. Brother was an alcoholic. Father abused the mother. Father abused her. Father's friend tried to rape patient. Father was comatose, etc., etc. Parents moved from Ukraine to Russia. Mother comes to visit my patient 6 months ago. Patient opens up to mother about her treatment and healing. Mother's response: I don't understand your concern. That's just the way it is. Here's an example of childhood that is a bit more subtle. Patient Y, age 25, MBA, loving father, loving mother, loving family. Father, a real estate magnate, programmed for wealth and high achievement. This patient personifies what Sarno refers to as the good and the perfect and need to please. The response to the family script of "you will be great" resulted in this person's critical, booger-driven critical script running amok with impossible objectives of perfectionism. This becomes a form of masochism. This is what drives the performance anxiety. By the way, for whatever it's worth, going back to critical script and values, judgment in the critical script. My definition of success is being in a good mood. Obviously, there are many and complex variables that go into this. You may want to check out the term eudaimonia, E-U-D-A-I-M-O-N-I-A, from Greek philosophy. It means discovering your passion and being the best version of yourself. Self-imposed pressures. Hardworking, conscientious, responsible to a fault, perfectionist, ambitious, their own severest critic, driven, sensitive to criticism, the need to please, be liked, approve of, the master caretaker. Plus the pressures of life and other symptoms, a reservoir overflow. Now, when I ask many patients, when did your problem begin? And what a common answer is, my problem began when I had my first panic attack. And I can understand why they say that, but if we put this under the microscope a little more carefully, what happened when they had their first panic attack was the result of their reservoir overflowing, and this had been going on for quite some time. I'm going to back up a little bit. You don't mind going back to the high performance mind. Okay, let's look at the natural child for a second. Okay, creativity, the development of ideas, discovery, sexuality. I was very much in my natural child in the late 1980s. It was during this time when I started to work with the media. I was passionate about what I was doing. I realized I was onto something. And then one day, I found myself on the telephone with the producer of the Sally Raphael show. So if any of you remember that, you're kind of like my age. And he said, when I had him on the phone, "You are on Oprah. We don't want you." Then he says, "Why do you have a PR firm?" Which I did then. And I was paying an intern probably $5 an hour to do the work. So he says, "Why do you have a PR firm?" I said, "To educate the world about social anxiety." His response, perfect answer. So I went on the show, 1988, 5,000 phone calls later. There was no internet. 5,000 phone calls later. It was quite an experience, but guess what? And this is an important takeaway from this seminar. The world still needs to be educated about social anxiety because it remains, mental health treatment for social anxiety remains a fragmented mess. You can quote me on that. Covered a lot. At this point, I would say, what are the questions that one has? Okay, so so the most important thing here is to understand that regarding tension myositis syndrome, that performance anxiety is a symptom. It is a manifestation of TMS. The brain produces the symptoms to protect us from these feelings. One patient, he happened to be 6'6", a real strappingly big guy, played semi-pro baseball for a while, was turned from a catcher into a pitcher, and he says to me, "Your book was great, but please don't insult me by saying that anything about my past has anything to do with my performance anxiety." So obviously, we were not compatible. Repressed energy is what the problem is all about. Remember, emotere. Okay, so what we do with reservoir work, we want to discover where booger came from. Remember, booger is the pathology. So there's two processes: bringing relevant content to a conscious level. This is called the process of unblending. What this means is to be able to go back in time and to identify target memories. Why? Not for the purpose of reliving trauma, but for the purpose of identifying the energy and the adaptation to it. So going vertical is the process of bringing it to a conscious level. Going horizontal, crossing that bridge into the emotional self, is what's crucial. Important for reservoir work, how one learns not to want to be the focus of attention. So trauma can be put under three categories here. Acute trauma, a very intense situation where one struggles with loss of control. Having a panic attack for the first time certainly comes under the heading of acute trauma. Chronic, the ongoing nature of things. For example, when parents suffer from alcoholism. As I said before, this is the perfect cookbook for performance anxiety. But when working with a patient, one needs to go back in time and to identify, well, when the parents were drinking or when the result of their drinking, how did you learn to respond? How did you learn to detach? Do you see the connection to hypervigilance? Do you see the potential of predicting their behavior? Because all of this puts excessive stress on one's nervous system. Okay, so we go vertical by identifying pertinent information. For example, here are examples. I was bullied, had a panic attack in front of the class in high school. My parents were alcoholics. I struggled with a learning disability. My sibling had special needs. There was illness in the family. I grew up in a family with significant financial distress. My parents got divorced. I was parentified. I learned to be a perfectionist to get attention. I had Palo Alto syndrome. That came from one of the physicians that I was working with. I grew up in a community that reinforced image sickness. Okay, it's one thing to identify this content. It's another to connect to one's emo tear. Hypervigilance. So talking about bridging from the intellectual to the emotional self, here is a bridge story. I have a story for just about everything. So this patient came to me at age 53. He is and was head of sales for a major media conglomerate, meaning that he is in charge of billions, that's with a B, yearly. And when I first met him, he was considering changing careers or leaving his career because of his anxiety problem. Now, I've worked with him for a long time. I see him once or twice a year for reinforcement, and he's actually he's at the point where he has fun with public speaking, and he's about ready to retire. Anyway, so when this is a reservoir story, when he was 15 years old, he was fishing on a train trestle with his father. Then all of a sudden, the next thing he knows, he's in the water. He looks back and he saw the train hit and kill his father. Now, obviously, that's an acute trauma, but the story goes quite a bit deeper than that. And this is where it took this patient a lot of integrity to share, because as tragic as that was, there was an underlying sense of relief, which the patient describes as follows. He would be aware every day at 5 o'clock, his father coming home, the sound of the door of his car slamming, walking up the steps, opening the door, my patient being on hyper alert, hypervigilance. Why? Because dad was emotionally abusive and drank too much. So hopefully this story can give insight as to the different layers of the trauma: acute, chronic, and then we have complex, which is the way that one's self-esteem is negatively and complexly impacted. Awareness requires, as I said before, a lot of intention to go inside. For example, here's another story. A 25-year-old Orthodox Jewish man shared that when he was 12, his cousin initiated homosexual activity with him. I asked, how'd you feel about it? His response, I don't know. During the week, he went into a dark room for about 20 minutes and meditated on the experience. In the next session, he came back to session and he shared, I felt aroused and confused. Now understand, this person had been spending his life detaching from that situation. This is a good example of the paradox of what's needed with reservoir work to connect to that emotion. So again, when doing reservoir work, it's all about where did Booker come from? How was the negative association to adrenaline learned? Identify acute scenarios of loss of control, humiliation, embarrassment. How was chronic hypervigilance learned? How is the disconnect, detachment learned? How is Booger learned? Who are the major players? Who are the influencers? One patient, 47 years old, top insurance salesman, top athlete. When he was 12 years old, his father was his little league baseball coach. So he's in a playoff game. He gets up to bat 3 times. He hits a home run. Pretty good, right? So after the game, the rest of the kids go to a pizza party, and his father takes him to a batting cage where he practices for 3 hours. Booger can come from many, many sources. Okay, now, as we're coming towards the end of this, medicine. Okay, so the beta blocker Xanax SSRI cocktail. In my professional opinion, having worked with a couple of thousand individuals with public speaking anxiety disorder, if you want to resolve the problem, not survive the problem, but resolve the problem, consider the following. Benzodiazepines like Valium, Xanax, and Klonopin have absolutely no value for performance anxiety other than immediate relief and escape. They are quite insidious as they breed dependence. Beta blockers, in most cases, flatten one out so that surfing skills acquisition is very difficult. They can be part of an effective treatment strategy only when used at the high end of the anxiety hierarchy only. There's an article, there's an interview on the homepage entitled High Performance Use of Beta Blockers. But I have seen countless situations where a person will take a beta blocker at any level on their hierarchy to play it safe. But again, you can't learn surfing skills with it. SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, commonly known as antidepressants, are the drug of choice for performance anxiety as they are quite effective at lowering the twin towers. Let's go back there. At lowering the twin towers on the before ego graph. Now, the primary, when you go for medicine, it's important to understand the hierarchy of symptoms. So for my patients with performance anxiety, it usually goes, obsessive worry is number 1. Panic, fear of panic and panic is number 2. And number 3, there's often an underlying dysthymia, which is a subset of depression. Think of it as an ongoing state of not being happy enough. I often ask patients, if you have on your hierarchy a level 5 or a level 7 on a Monday, is it going to impact your mood during the weekend? So SSRIs are very effective. As a matter of fact, when I look at the last approximately, I've been doing this for a long time, 1,000 people who are on SSRIs, 90% of the time the SSRI does what it's supposed to do. That said, one patient who during the epidemic was a major player in distributing medical equipment. And what he said on his hierarchy, there was no more hierarchy 1 to 10 because every day he had to be meeting with professionals and politicians. So it became a relative phenomenon. Anyway, he goes to his doctor. This is in the Southeast Conference, looking for an SSRI. And the doctor, this is a general internist, And the doctor says, I know a lot about SSRIs. I've been on Prozac for 20 years. Okay, that's not what we're looking for here, at least in my opinion. So first of all, when going to a doctor for pharmaceuticals, I highly encourage that you go to a psychopharmacologist, because that person is going to be much more aware of comorbid situations. The way that I use an SSRI is I try to condition my patients to think of it as a metaphorical pregnancy, meaning that over the course of 9 months to a year, the goal of the medicine is to lower the twin towers that you see on the graph so that the other states can grow. So this becomes an investment in pharmaceutical neuroplasticity. Now, I will say, and this might surprise you, when I look at the last 100 patients who have successfully negotiated their performance anxiety, 15 to 20% have done it without medicine. What this means is that this twin towers reflex can be exceptionally ingrained. But obviously, there's a lot of negative script about medicine. Going back to that person who was the ACC quarterback, when I brought medicine up for him, he said, medicine, I'd rather be on heroin. Long story short, he's on an SSRI and he's doing quite well. Okay, so I try to teach my patients to have this proactive strategy with an SSRI so that eventually they can go up, but all too often that's not the case. As one patient who's an executive in international medical sales equipment, who suffered from hyperhidrosis since he's 12 years old. He can remember being avoidant because of excessive sweating, and recounted a situation when he went for a haircut at age 12 and he was sweating and he was so embarrassed. And after that point, so super hyper vigilant and avoiding those situations. And this was another person who said, medicine never, never, never take it off the table. Okay, flash forward. My career has progressed tremendously. I don't want to go off the medicine. That kind of thing happens. What the medicine can do is it can do many things. Neuroplasticity, it can create confidence and a proactive approach. I like telling this story also. One person who was age 25, who suffered from erythrophobia, fear of blushing. He had done his reservoir work quite well, and he's in his college class one day, and he's about to give a presentation, and he says, I call this the magic trick story. And he says to his class, guys, in a minute, you're going to see a magic trick. My face is going to change color, meaning it's going to blush. Guess what? He didn't blush. Now, the reason is because he was on offense. It is a defensive positioning graphed out by this reflex here that puts the pressure on the nervous system, which causes the symptoms. So basically what I've tried to do here is to give a marathon's worth of content in what is a relative sprint, but ending this with getting back to Sarno and tension myositis syndrome. Sarno reflects, everyone hates the idea of aging and mortality. Most people tend to philosophize about them and explain them away. But it is very important to understand what is your most valuable asset. Your most valuable asset is time. Time is not elastic, it doesn't stretch. You can borrow money, you can't borrow time. And the thing with performance anxiety and social anxiety in general, performance anxiety is a subset of social anxiety. These are diseases of resistance. They get worse with time. It's like putting, you put money in the bank to collect interest. Here, the problem collects interest over time and it gets more ingrained. So understand that people with public speaking anxiety and the fear of being noticeably nervous, they are going to wait until the last moment to get help. So your most valuable asset is time. And if I were to take out the bio card right now, it's changing from black to a little bit of red. So I'm a little less stressed than when I began the workshop. I hope this seminar has been a productive workout, and I wish you high performance.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now it's time for a Q&A, and folks could write your questions in the text chat box. And we have a lot of questions. Okay, so can you explain more about what the journaling looks like, again, for the reservoir and front line?
Yeah. Okay. So it goes like this. So there's section A and section B. Section A is on the front line during the week with your energy. So it all comes down to, it's all based on the hierarchy. So I was in a situation 2, and this is what I experienced internally, the awakening of energy. I was in a situation 4, and the awakening turned into a wave. I tried to surf, okay, and so forth, a level 5, a level 6, etc., to be able to describe the energy. Again, this thing of describing the awakening is one of the most complex and difficult for most of my patients because they have not learned to go inside. This is cross-training. This is paradoxical. I use the term, I felt electric. I still feel a little electric, but not as much as an hour ago. Okay, it's tuning into this electricity. Section B is deeper work, which is where did all this come from? Insight, what relevant content is there from the past? And then with section A and B, I encourage patients to build into both sections their emo tear. I was in a presentation this week and I felt so terrific. I felt great. I was in a presentation this week and I bombed and I'm so embarrassed and I'm not going back to work. It's building in emo tear. That's what journaling is all about. And there's a lot of, by the way, there's a lot in pop culture and in psychology circles and in the media these days. It's almost every day I'm seeing some kind of article or presentation on the power of journaling.
Our next question. Do you do longer trainings to get in more detail, and do you teach self-soothing skills?
Do I do longer training to get into more detail? There is a longer training thing at the at socialanxiety.com. There's a program, it's a DVD program called Social Anxiety, The Untold Story. This is 11 hours. This was originally developed for mental health professionals to teach them how to deal with this. It was developed by a family foundation. That's what's available for the longer training. What was the other question that was asked?
The other question is, do you teach self-soothing skills?
Well, I try to do that when I'm working with somebody clinically. Self-soothing skills comes under the heading of self-nurturing. So yes, that is a component of treatment.
Okay. And do you think there is also a genetic component to social anxiety or anxiety?
Absolutely. There's a genetic component to everything. But the worst mistake, the biggest mistake that anybody can make is to believe I was born this way. There's nothing that I can do about it. The key word is compensation. You know, I discovered, this is a little sideways here, but I discovered social anxiety in 1978. Okay, I was working as a youth worker in a community center. One of my associates was doing special ed for the Girl Scouts. And she said, let's start a socialization program for teenagers with learning disabilities. I had no idea what she was talking about. But then we started the interview process, and then an amazing thing happened, rather an interesting thing. Many of the people interviewed didn't show up for the actual group. That's how I discovered social anxiety. But the key thing there is all of these people were born with learning disabilities. And an important part of when they got into clinical treatment is to learn how to compensate for them. So that's the operative word here, is compensating for the predisposition. And the most common predisposition that I see with performance anxiety is OCPD, perfectionism, obsessive compulsive personality disorder.
Okay. Can you describe the process of surfing? And when you mentioned your cat surfing, how does it work? Is it like visualization?
Well, to dumb it down, it goes like this. When the adrenaline hits, I want to teach people it's just ready, set, go. That's what I said to myself this morning. I was feeling the electricity. Okay, ready, set, go. But what is surfing? When I live in East Hampton, I like to go to the beach, and there's a section of the beach where the surfers go because the waves are a certain way. And when hurricane weather happens, that's when the surfers like to come out, 10, 11-foot waves. But basically it goes like this. The wave is a metaphor for the adrenaline. It is force, it is power. You got to go with it. That's getting on the surfboard and going with it. The person with anxiety has learned that the wave means bad things. The electricity, the energy, the adrenaline means bad things. So it means let's escape it. So this is the opposite. This is cross training. It's going with it. So I put my surfing cat on there. It's also important to have a little sense of humor.
Do you apply this work to autistic individuals also?
Can it be applied? Yes. Do I? No.
Okay. What does the course of treatment look like? How long? What are the places where patients get stalled?
Where patients get what?
Stalled.
Oh, well, everybody has their own learning curve. Okay, so here are some of the variables. How long has the problem been there? How ingrained is the obsessive reflex? What is the motivation? What is the person's motivation to get well? You need a lot of motivation for this. This is really hard stuff. I totally discourage people, and this is at the risk of being controversial, okay? This is where I have a problem with CBT because they promise all kinds of results in a short process. This is a very complex problem. Okay, getting into the nitty-gritty roots of how did one's identity become confused with performance is not going to be resolved with behavioral technique. So I try to condition clients to think of therapy it's the equivalent of a 10K run. It's not a dash around the track. Now, of course, not everybody does well. There are many people who just can't do this. They will not go inside. More people can't do this or choose not to do this than do it.
Okay. How do you work with reluctant clients, for example, a strong male personality, and get them to buy into the therapy? Are there specific resources you recommend to those clients?
Okay. This takes us into the realm of social anxiety beyond performance anxiety. Okay, so with public speaking anxiety and performance anxiety, I am only working with people who have initiative. I have another podcast out that people might be interested. It's called Public Speaking Anxiety and Fear of Being Noticeably Nervous, Mind Surgery for High Performers. These people have initiative. Okay, when we're talking about social anxiety, and this is where the mental health profession is very confused. There are two types, and this hopefully will answer the question. There are two types of patients who have social anxiety. One is the person with initiative. The other person does not have initiative. No children have initiative. most adolescents don't have initiative. And when we have the 26-year-old who's in his room or her room, I don't want to be sexist here, playing video games all day long, not working and not socializing, this person has no initiative for their mental health. It is up to the caregivers to learn what to do. So I get a call from a mother who says, I want you to see my son, he's 26 years old. I said, fine, I need to see you first. She says with indignation, why do you see me? Why do you want to see me? He's 26 years old. My response, why are you making the phone call? Okay, so the dynamics of avoidance and dependence bring the mental health profession to its knees in terms of social anxiety. So to answer the question again, with public speaking, I'm only working with people who have initiative. With social anxiety in general, with people who don't have initiative, it has to be conducted, at least to begin with, through the parents, because they're the ones who have leverage.
Okay. How often have you encountered clients who use opiates before speaking? This person had a client who would mask his anxiety with opioids, but he would not remember the public speaking engagement. This was the rationale for the opiates. If it didn't happen, I was not nervous.
That's a creative approach. I don't, not many people that I work with performance anxiety use opiates. Very often they are using benzos and they're using alcohol and they're using other substances, but not specifically that.
Okay. Do you show your clients the same graphs you showed us that had the NP, CP,
Yes,
AC?
absolutely. I'm giving patients those graphs on the either the second or the third session I have with them as an introduction to the psychological part of this. I start with the hierarchy piece and the basic orientation, but I want them to have this mind state tools under their belts, hopefully by session 3 or 4.
Great. Okay. Do you develop the behavioral hierarchy in session, or is that assigned homework?
It's assigned homework.
Okay.
I don't know what it is. It's totally a subjective process.
Can performance in
For example,
uh-huh.
typically a person will go to Toastmasters and that on average is going to be a 5 or a 6, okay, on the hierarchy. That said, for a lot of my patients who are higher up executives, Toastmasters is not really going to create a ripple. You know, what they're concerned about with is the board of directors, so it's all relative.
Okay. Can you talk more about the physiological strategies and practices for riding the adrenaline wave, and further for when dissociative symptoms appear?
It's all about accepting the energy and breathing. Okay, on a deeper level. I mean, it's all about breathing and surfing, which takes reps. Okay, on a deeper level, when one considers breathing, booger, critical script, is suffocating the natural child. That's where the deeper work has to be done. And how did that come to be? But in terms of practical skills acquisition, you want to get as many surfing reps as is possible. Now, this also is a lead into the possible use of pharmaceuticals, because when a person is trapped and they're not having let's say, an enthusiastic attitude, or they're totally stuck with surfing reps, that's a good indication that medicine is needed.
Okay. Can performance anxiety also be attributed to hormonal imbalances, such as in cases of female clients who have PMDD, who in some weeks when they feel good perform better in presentation, and other weeks when they don't feel good, they perform poorly?
My short answer is, of course.
Okay. Will you please elaborate on the booger reference? Is that related to the Runaway Booger book?
Yeah, booger. Okay. I gave this book to my granddaughter when she was 5, and then I realized I had to take it back to show my patients because I couldn't get another copy. Okay, so All of these mind states are really important. But it is the critical script. Remember, the critical script itself is important. You want to be able to analyze and critique, but it's the excessive content in that critical script where one learns to over criticize, over be fearing judgment, being overly in the process of putting oneself down. This becomes masochism. A lot of people have learned to equate giving themselves pain via the critical script, now known as booger, with control. So just very simply, I wanted to give it a personality. Oh, and when people are journaling during the course of the week, one thing that I ask them to do is, tell me about your interactions with booger during the week, the wins and the losses.
Okay. Any specific recommendations in working with children or adolescents with social anxiety?
There's plenty of information at socialanxiety.com for that.
Okay. Do you believe that culture and ethnicity of clients may impact their treatments?
Without a doubt. Yes, absolutely. And there are many cultures who are totally anti-therapy. I mean, right now, for example, I don't want to be, too sexist here, but right now I have four Asian clients in my practice. That's a culture that really does not support an investment in therapy. But the answer to the question is yes.
Okay. Is EMDR an effective tool in this process?
That is a very good question. EMDR in the hands of a skilled practitioner can be really effective in helping the person specifically connect to relevant trauma content. As a primary protocol for performance anxiety, no. As a subset to do good trauma work, absolutely yes.
Okay, we have really good questions here today. Have you met any patients misdiagnosed with ADHD and really need support with performance anxiety?
Oh, that is a good question. Okay. Many of my patients with performance anxiety have ADD, ADHD. Okay, but here's an example of something. I hope this is not too complicated. So one patient is a very successful entrepreneur, makes many millions of dollars, has 8 kids, is a philanthropist, has some marital conflict. So his wife goes to therapy, talks to a therapist comes back with, well, your husband obviously has ADD, went through all kinds of symptoms and stuff like that. Well, absolutely he has ADD, but that's not this is where it gets complex. That's not the primary component. The primary component for this person is a compulsion, an addiction to always be busy at the expense of going inside. He's always busy in the community. He's always doing business deals. He's always in the car. He's always driving. He's always doing, and he doesn't go inside. For me to get him to do journaling he basically 95% does not do it. Okay, because of this difficulty. But there is comorbid ADD, and that is often the case.
Okay, and I guess this will be our last question. Can you repeat the word? Somebody missed the word that meant discovering the best version of self. Was it duty?
Oh, yeah, okay. Eudaimonia, EUDAIMONIA. Find your passion and be the best version of yourself is my definition of success, which comes from critical script.
Jonathan, can you spell it again and I'll put it in the chat box?
Okay, I believe it's EUDAIMONIA.
Oh, that was too fast for me. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. EUDAIMONIA.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, I'd like to thank the audience for asking such wonderful questions. And Jonathan, that was a spectacular webinar. We could have kept on going with the questions. And It was very informative, and I encourage people to check out your website and your DVD and your book. So if you are not a section member, please join us. And we have section members have free access to specialty practice section webinars like this one. You will also receive, when you're a section member, social work focused publications, and have access to a private online community. There are 11 different practice areas to choose from. You may learn more by going to www.socialworkers.org/sections, and you must be a NASW member to join a section. And our next webinar will be May 3rd, a discussion on school-based violence, a description, prevalence, and tools for social workers. Please visit the Specialty Practice Sections webinar catalog for more details. If you want to continue today's webinar discussion and you're a section member, please visit one of your 3 online communities and start a thread by clicking My NASW tab on the main page, and we want to hear from you. As a reminder, you can earn 1.5 clinical contact hours of CEs for today's webinar by completing the evaluation and post-test. And I'd like to thank everyone again, and this concludes the webinar. You may now disconnect.
I want to ask you a question before.
You want to be on camera? I mean, you want me to end the webinar?
Yeah, when you end the webinar, I just want to ask you something.
Okay.